"Do you ever wonder," she said softly one morning, staring at the pale winter sky above the park, "why some people look so complete, like they have everything figured out, and you're still just running in circles?" Her coworker beside her laughed a little, sipping her coffee, not really listening. But the question lingered in Ellery Calloway's chest, like a stone she couldn't quite put down. Ellery was 27 years old, sharp as a tack, and always moving fast. She had earned her business administration degree with honors, landed a role as office executive at Caldwell and Merritt Solutions before her 25th birthday, and been promoted just 8 months ago. Her boss, Director Everett Rains, a steady and quietly observant man of 39, had told her during the promotion, "Good work matters, but good people matter more. Keep being both." She had smiled, nodded, and gone straight back to her desk. She lived alone in a clean, compact apartment 2 blocks from the office. Her mornings were engineered for efficiency. Alarm at 6, coffee at 6:15, out the door by 6:50. She walked the same route every single day. Through the iron gate of Callaway Memorial Park, coincidentally sharing her surname, and out the other side onto 5th Avenue, arriving at the office at exactly 7:12. It was on this route, sometime in the tail end of autumn, that she first noticed him. He was an elderly man, perhaps 70, perhaps a little older. He sat on the third bench from the park's east entrance, the one beneath the sprawling oak tree that dropped golden leaves in long, lazy spirals when the wind moved through. He wore a clean gray coat, dark trousers, and a soft wool scarf the color of sage. On his lap, or sometimes balanced at his side, was a small cloth bag. And every morning, without exception, he reached into that bag and scattered birdseed across the ground in slow, deliberate arcs, the way a person scatters something they consider sacred. Ellery noticed him the way you notice background music in a cafe, present, pleasant, not quite reaching consciousness. She walked past again, the next day, and the day after that. It was her co-worker Simone Ashby who first made a joke of it. Simone was bubbly and irreverent, and always said the quiet part loud. "Oh, the Birdman's there again," she said one morning. "Maybe he's just lonely. Or maybe he's an eccentric millionaire who only speaks to sparrows." She laughed. Ellery smiled politely. But something stuck. Just the word lonely. It felt too small for what Ellery saw. The man on the bench didn't look lonely. He looked somehow like the least lonely person she had ever seen. She began watching him more carefully as she passed. He never looked up at passers-by. He never seemed to be waiting for someone. He simply sat and scattered seed, and occasionally tilted his head as if listening to something beyond what ordinary ears could catch. The birds, sparrows mostly, with a few pigeons and the occasional bold robin, gathered around his feet with a familiarity that suggested they knew him well. He would reach down sometimes, very slowly, and 1 or 2 of the braver sparrows would come close enough to eat from the ground, just inches from his shoes. Winter deepened. December arrived. The park turned gray and skeletal, bare branches pressing against a white sky. And still, he came. Every morning, 7 o'clock, without fail. Ellery began to feel a strange, low hum of curiosity that she couldn't quite silence. Who was this man? What made someone do this, day after day, in cold and warmth alike, in rain and pale winter sunlight? What was he holding on to? Or what was holding on to him? She never stopped to ask. She was always running slightly late, or carrying coffee in one hand and her phone in the other, or mentally reviewing the morning's agenda. The man on the bench became a fixed point in her daily route, like a landmark she navigated by but never approached. And then came the morning that changed everything. It was a Tuesday in early January, the kind of morning that felt like a bruise, gray-purple sky, air sharp enough to cut. She had received an email before even leaving her apartment. A client's entire project had been rejected by the executive board. 3 months of her work, gone. Her first instinct was to fix it before she'd even put her coat on properly. But her hands were shaking as she typed, and she mistyped 3 words in a row, and she stopped. She put the phone in her pocket. She looked at herself in the hallway mirror, hair pulled back, coat half-buttoned, eyes slightly too wide, and something inside her said, "Not yet." She walked her usual route. But when she reached the park gate, instead of passing through toward Fifth Avenue, she stopped. She looked toward the 3rd bench from the east entrance. The man in the gray coat was there. Of course he was there. The birds were gathering, as they always did. For the first time in months, Ellery Calloway did not go straight to work. She walked to the bench. She sat down at the far end, leaving perhaps 3 feet of space between herself and the elderly man. She didn't speak. He didn't speak. A sparrow hopped closer to investigate, then thought better of it. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that has texture, that breathes. After perhaps 4 or 5 minutes, Ellery spoke. She hadn't planned what to say. The words came out softly, almost to herself. "Why do you come here every single morning?" The man didn't startle. He didn't turn to her immediately. He finished scattering a small handful of seed, watching the birds adjust and reorganize around the offering, before he turned to look at her. His face was deeply lined, but his eyes were clear and warm, the pale gray blue of a winter sea. He smiled gently, because someone still waits for breakfast. Ellery looked at him, then looked around at the birds. She felt the confusion on her face. He saw it too. He pointed toward a small sparrow slightly apart from the others, bolder than the rest, with a tiny white marking near one eye. "She's been coming for 4 years. My wife named her Pearl." He said it without breaking, without the careful way people usually say hard things. Simply, clearly, like a fact about the weather. "Your wife?" Ellery said. He folded the cloth bag neatly in his lap. "She passed away 5 years ago, but we used to come here together every morning. It was her idea, feeding the birds. She said it was the best way to start a day, doing something kind before the world gets complicated." He paused. "After she was gone, I kept coming. Not because I couldn't let go, but because she was right about the kindness, and because I made her a promise that I'd never let them go hungry." Ellery sat with that for a moment. The sparrow he'd called Pearl hopped a little closer. The bare oak branches moved above them, shifting the pale light in slow patterns across the ground. "How long?" Ellery asked. "How long have you been doing this?" 5 years, 2 months, and he checked his watch, an old analog one with a worn leather strap. About 11 days. She didn't know what to say, so she said what was true. "That's extraordinary." He tilted his head the way the birds sometimes did. "Is it? It takes about 20 minutes, and it starts every day on a good note." He smiled again, and this time there was something in it that made Ellery feel inexplicably like crying. Not from sadness, from recognition of something she had been missing for a very long time. His name was Garrison Wolfe. He was 70 years old. He had been the principal of Hargrove Elementary School for 22 years before retiring. His wife, Lenora, "I used to joke that the universe had a plan when she introduced herself," he said, glancing at Ellery's name badge. "They had, as Garrison put it quietly, borrowed other people's children for about 4 decades each, so we did all right." Ellery went to work that morning 40 minutes late. She sent Everett Raines a brief, honest message. "I needed a few minutes this morning. I'm in now." He replied with 3 words. "Take what you need." She thought about Garrison all day, about what it meant to keep a promise to someone who could no longer hear you keep it, about what it meant to perform an act of kindness so routinely that it became simply who you were, rather than something you did. She came back to the park the next morning, and the morning after that. Not every day, her schedule didn't always allow it, but perhaps 3 mornings a week, she found herself walking a little more slowly, and if Garrison was there, she would sit. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they simply watched the birds together. He taught her things, quietly and without any sense of curriculum. He told her the names of birds, not just sparrow, but the particular kind. He told her that pigeons, widely dismissed, were among the most loyal creatures alive, mating for life, finding their way home across hundreds of miles. People underestimate what they consider common, he said one morning. Most beautiful things are hiding in plain sight. Ellery began to slow down, incrementally the way a river widens as it nears the sea. She started leaving the office before 8 some evenings, something she hadn't done in over a year. She called her mother, Judith Calloway, a librarian with a gentle voice, and they talked for over an hour, about nothing in particular, and everything that mattered. Her father, Warren Calloway, told her on one of these calls, "You sound different, better different." She thought about Garrison when he said that. Her co-worker and office friend Simone Ashby noticed too. "You stopped sending emails at midnight," Simone said one afternoon, squinting at her with theatrical suspicion. "Who are you, and what have you done with Ellery Calloway?" Ellery laughed, really laughed, not the quick professional laugh she usually deployed. "I've been having morning meetings in the park," she said. Simone raised an eyebrow. "With the Birdman?" "His name is Garrison," Nora said. And yes, the February mornings grew colder. The park was mostly empty at 7 a.m. now, except for the committed dog walkers, and of course, Garrison Wolfe on his bench. Ellery had started bringing an extra cup of coffee, black with 1 sugar, she'd learned, and he'd accepted it the first time with a look of quiet surprise that made her chest tighten. "You didn't have to," he said. "I know," she replied. "That's why I did." He looked at her for a moment, over the rim of the cup. "Lenora used to say something like that," he said. Then he looked back at the birds, and they didn't speak about it further, but the moment sat between them like something warm. And then came the morning Ellery arrived at the park, and found the bench empty. It was a Thursday. The bench beneath the oak was bare. The birds were there. Pearl hopped around the base of the bench, with an air of mild confusion. But Garrison was not. Ellery stood very still for a moment, looking at the empty bench, with a feeling she hadn't expected, a cold, sudden fear. She sat down anyway. She waited 15 minutes. He didn't come. She went to work deeply unsettled. She tried to tell herself it was nothing. He was likely tired, or had an appointment, or simply hadn't felt like going out in the cold. But Garrison had not missed a single morning in 5 years, 2 months, and 11 days. She knew that number. She had held it in her mind since the day he said it. By afternoon, she had made a decision. She went back to the park after work, and spoke to an elderly woman she'd seen there occasionally, walking a small terrier. A woman named Shirley, who it turned out lived in the apartment complex next door to Garrison's, and had known him for several years. Shirley's face went soft with worry when Ellery described the empty bench. "I saw an ambulance yesterday evening," Shirley said carefully, "outside his building. I didn't want to assume, but—" Ellery found Garrison at St. Augustine's Hospital the following morning. He was in a room on the 4th floor, propped against pillows, with a thin hospital blanket and an air of mild indignation. He had had a cardiac event. Minor, the doctor said, very manageable, caught early. He would need rest. But the word fine looked different standing in that room, in harsh fluorescent light, next to this man who had become, without Ellery quite noticing when, genuinely important to her. "I brought Pearl's breakfast," she said, holding up the small cloth bag of bird seed she had taken from his apartment, with Shirley's help, that morning. "I fed them before I came. Pearl ate. I think she was annoyed." Garrison's expression was something she would carry for the rest of her life. Pure, uncomplicated gratitude. Not performed, not managed, real. "You didn't have to," he said, and his voice was rough. "I know," she said, and they both understood what that meant. She visited him every day for the week he was hospitalized. On the 3rd visit, a nurse mentioned that he'd been receiving quite a lot of mail. Handwritten letters, cards, small drawings. The nurse had stacked them in a neat pile on the bedside table. Ellery picked one up with Garrison's easy gesture of permission, and read it. It was from a child named Marcus, perhaps 9 or 10, who wrote in careful, slightly uneven capitals. Mr. Garrison, I hope you get better. You taught me that robins sing loudest in the morning because they are the first to believe the day will be good. I think about that all the time. She looked up at Garrison. Who is Marcus? She asked. Garrison smiled. A boy from the neighborhood. I used to talk with him when he walked to school. Curious kid. Loved birds. Ellery set the letter down carefully and picked up another. This one was from Dorothy, 74 years old, who wrote that for 3 winters she had watched Garrison from her window every morning, and that his consistency, his daily presence, his small faithful ritual had helped her survive the first year after her husband's passing. You didn't know it, she wrote, but seeing you there reminded me that the world still had kind people in it. That was enough to get up some mornings. Ellery put the letter down. She did not trust her voice for a moment. There were dozens of these letters, from school children who had met him during weekend nature walks he organized through the local community center. From Beverly, who wrote that Garrison had sat beside her for 45 minutes on a park bench, helping her fashion a proper support for a bird's broken wing, then helped her locate a wildlife rehabilitator. From Terrence, who wrote that Garrison had quietly sponsored 3 families in the neighborhood park cleanup initiative without telling anyone. The families had only found out when the park center thanked him publicly at a community meeting he hadn't known they planned. From elderly neighbors who had seen Garrison quietly remove litter from the park each morning after feeding the birds, week after week, season after season. Garrison was watching her read. She looked up when she finished the last letter. You never said, she began, and stopped. Said what? He asked, mildly. Any of this. All of this. You just... She gestured at the pile of letters, at the window beyond which the city carried on. Did things? He offered. Quietly, she said. You just did things quietly. He was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was even and careful. Lenora used to say that kindness performed for recognition is a transaction. But kindness given freely, without expectation, that's a gift. The gift doesn't need to announce itself. He paused. I didn't feed those birds to be seen. I did it because they were hungry and because she loved them, and because being kind was the last way I had left to feel close to her. Everything else, he glanced at the letters, everything else just happened alongside. Ellery sat with this for a long time. The fluorescent light hummed above them. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled by. I think, she said slowly, that I have been living my life like a transaction. Garrison looked at her, not with pity, not with judgment, just with seeing. You're 27, he said, and you sat beside a stranger on a cold bench because something about it felt right. That's not a transaction. That's the beginning of something. He was discharged 9 days after admission. Ellery was there when he came home, partly because she had offered to help, and partly because she couldn't imagine not being there. Shirley from next door had brought soup. The birds were gathered around the building entrance when they arrived, in a small clustering of wings that made them both stop walking for a moment. They knew, Garrison said. They absolutely did not know, Ellery said. They absolutely did, he replied, and went inside with his soup and his letters and his careful steps. Ellery told Simone about the letters the next day at work. Simone immediately had 3 ideas and shared them with rapid-fire energy. Within a week, they had presented a proposal to Everett Rains. Everett Rains listened with his characteristic stillness. No expression, no interruption, just listening. When they finished, he said, I want to support this. I want to do it properly. Show me a plan. The plan came together over the following 6 weeks. Caldwell and Merritt Solutions would sponsor an urban green initiative, bird feeders and native plant beds in 5 city parks, beginning with Callaway Memorial Park. They would partner with the local school district for a nature education program. They would create an employee volunteer program, 2 paid hours per month for community park projects. Everett suggested the company sponsor the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center that had once cared for Beverly's bird, after Ellery tracked it down and found it operating on a threadbare budget. Ellery went to Garrison with the plan. She sat across from him in his small, warm apartment, bookshelves along every wall, a worn armchair by the window that looked out toward the park, a photograph of Lenora on the mantelpiece, smiling in the kind of light that belonged to a different season, and she walked him through it. He listened carefully. He asked 2 or 3 quiet questions, and then he said, "She would have loved this." He didn't mean Simone, or Everett, or any of them. He meant Lenora, and Ellery understood. The first Saturday community morning happened in April, when the park was beginning to soften at its edges. First crocuses pushing through cold soil, the oak tree barely suggesting green at the tips of its branches. It began simply. Ellery and Simone, with 4 other employees, including a junior analyst named Preston Hale, who turned out to have a previously undisclosed passion for ornithology. Garrison was there on his bench, having arrived at exactly 7 a.m., as he always did. But others came too. Shirley brought her terrier, and 3 neighbors from the apartment building. 2 families from the school district nature program showed up with their children, the little ones already reaching toward the birds. Dorothy arrived with a friend, both in sensible coats and good shoes. Beverly came, recognized Garrison immediately, and shook his hand with both of hers, and could not quite speak for a moment. Even Everett Raines was there, wearing a jacket rather than his usual suit, looking both uncertain and genuinely glad. They planted 2 native flower beds that morning. They installed 3 bird feeders, one at Garrison's bench, positioned so Pearl and her flock could reach it with their usual territorial confidence. Preston Hale led an earnest impromptu lecture about sparrow migration, that 3 children and Everett Raines followed with close attention. Ellery stood at the edge of it all for a moment, watching. She watched Garrison in the center of this gathering, not presiding, simply being there, talking to Dorothy, scattering seed with his usual quiet deliberateness, occasionally tilting his head when he was listening to something others couldn't hear. She thought of the first morning she had sat beside him, the question she had asked, the answer he had given. Because someone still waits for breakfast. He had meant the birds. He had meant Lenora. He had meant the accumulated trust of every person who had ever been quietly, faithfully served by his steady kindness. He had meant all of it at once. Simone appeared at Ellery's elbow. "You look like you're about to cry," she said pleasantly. "I'm fine," Ellery said. "You're absolutely not fine, but in a good way," Simone said. "This is good, Ellery. You did this." "He did this," Ellery said. "Over 5 years, one morning at a time. We just finally showed up." She walked over to Garrison's bench and sat down beside him, the way she had first sat beside him, at the far end, leaving space. But this time, he reached over and patted the bench between them, and she moved closer. For a few minutes, they simply watched. The park was full of small, purposeful movements, people planting, children pointing at birds, dogs investigating everything with serious attention, Preston Hale still talking about sparrows to a small and riveted audience. Pearl landed on the armrest of the bench, not 6 inches from Garrison's hand. She pecked once at the bench surface, and then looked at Ellery with the frank, assessing stare of a sparrow who has earned the right to opinions. "She likes you," Garrison said quietly then. "She's judging me," Ellery said. "Same thing with Pearl," he replied softly. Ellery looked at him. He was looking at the park, at all these people who had arrived because of him, because of letters in curved script and children's block capitals, because of a woman named Lenora, who had loved birds and given her husband a reason to keep showing up every single morning, and because of a young woman who had been moving too fast and one morning chose to sit down. "You changed my life," Ellery said, quietly, without drama, just as a fact, the way he always stated things. Garrison was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You chose to sit down. That's the only thing I did, made it worth sitting down." He reached into his cloth bag and held out a small handful of birdseed. She held out her palm, and he poured it in. She scattered it across the ground in front of the bench, the way she'd watched him do hundreds of times. Slow, deliberate, like something given freely. Pearl hopped down from the armrest and began to eat. Above them, The oak tree was luminous with new leaves, trembling in a light spring wind. The park, for one long quiet moment, was full of the sound of people doing something kind. Kindness practiced quietly, every single day, does not stay quiet forever. It speaks in the language of letters written by strangers, of children who remember what robins sing, of old women who get out of bed because they saw from their window one faithful person doing one small good thing. It speaks in the language of benches that become gathering places, of seeds scattered freely on cold ground, of promises kept to people we have loved and lost. It asks nothing in return, except that someone, somewhere, choose to sit down, and when they do, when they are still enough, for long enough, they hear it. The world asking, quietly and without ceasing, be kind, be kind, be kind. Some people leave behind monuments, others leave behind mornings that make the world a little kinder. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.